Good evening, everyone. My name is Daphne Rabinovich, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to the Giller Book Club, the fifth in a series of 14. Please check our website for the complete list and to register every month. You really don't want to miss a single one. Also, please make sure to have your Zoom on a side-by-side view for the best possible experience. It is my profound pleasure tonight to introduce you to our interviewer, Ben McNally, owner of Ben McNally Books in Toronto, a cherished independent Toronto bookstore and a champion of Canadian authors. I'm lucky to call him and his wife Lynn friends and colleagues. Launched in 2007, Ben's store, which he runs with his son Rupert and his daughter Danielle, has always been a haven for book lovers. Located in downtown Toronto, the store has been called an integral part of the literary landscape of Toronto and a veritable temple of books. As one senior executive at Penguin Random House Canada put it, every international publishing colleague who comes to Toronto is awed by a must-see visit to Ben's store. It is without a doubt a book lover's dream, and they are wonderful booksellers who care deeply about authors and their books and their customers. Tonight, Ben will be interviewing Annabel Lyon, author of the long-listed novel, Consent. There will be lots of fascinating questions and a reading. And if you'd like to join in the conversation, just click on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and submit a question. So without further ado, I welcome Ben McNally and Annabel Lyon.
Thank you, Daphne. I am Ben McNally, and I'm in Ontario, and I'm on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation, and historically of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and the Huron-Wendat. And I am respectful of that history, and affirm our responsibility to uphold the principles of the dish with one spoon covenant. And I'm here to introduce our author, Annabel Lyon. And Annabel is no stranger to the Giller Prize. This is her 7th book and the 3rd time that she has been longlisted for the Giller Prize. Her novel, The Golden Mean, was actually shortlisted for the Giller Prize, and Sweet Girl and Now Consent have been longlisted. The Golden Mean went on to win the Rogers Fiction Prize in 2009, and her new novel, Consent, has just been nominated for the prestigious. It's on the long list for the prestigious Women's Fiction Prize from the UK. Annabel is a full-time teacher of creative writing at UBC, the preeminent school for writers in the country. And I'm kind of chuffed at having the opportunity to talk to her. Annabel?
Thank you so much, Ben. It's really lovely to have the chance to chat with you. And I'm coming to you from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations, otherwise known as beautiful Vancouver, British Columbia. It's so lovely to be here with you.
And with you and audience, with all of you. Annabel, let's talk first about this book. It's a pretty impressive and complicated story. Where did it come from?
It came from a short story that I published way back in 2004. And I know aspiring novelists never want to hear that it takes you like 16 years to write a book, but this one took a long time. And that short story was, I think, is now what is chapter 2. So it was Sarah coming home to discover that her sister has gotten married without her sort of consent, and she has a developmental delay. So there's a question as to whether she's able to give consent. I heard a version of this story from a family friend who worked as a lawyer and, had to intercede in such a situation on behalf of the family to get the marriage annulled. And it's a really unhappy story because nobody wants to have to go before a judge and have somebody named incompetent, unable to give consent. But I wrote up this story and it never kind of left me. And I kept thinking, but what next? But what next? What if I went further with this? So gradually over the years, this story of the first set of sisters came out. That's Sarah and Maddie. And then the second set of sisters didn't actually come along until quite a ways into the process. And then it was a matter of braiding the two storylines together.
And so you knew about both sides. You knew about both threads separately then to begin with.
Separately, I only had that first set of sisters initially. I had Sarah and Maddie, and I had written their story out, and it was about, I don't know, 80, 90 pages long. And I shared it with my editor, the wonderful Anne Collins at Penguin Random House. And we talked about different ways that we could sort of blow it out to proper novel length. And nothing felt right. It felt forced. Like I felt like their story was whole. And so I thought, okay, so I need something complementary to add to it then, as opposed to just kind of padding it. And that's when the story of the other pair of sisters kind of came to me. So I worked on that for a while. And then it was like, okay, they're running on parallel tracks. Where's going to be the point of contact that's going to bring them together into the same novel? And that was hard work. And that came to me as a surprise, honestly.
Right. So you didn't know where they were going to end up.
No, and that's really unusual for me because I'm a fairly disciplined outliner, and I like to kind of be in control of my little imaginary people and put them where I want them. And when they surprise me, it's always a little bit disconcerting. They surprised me in this book.
So was it difficult to some extent to write the book?
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was slow. I think that's the thing. This one came out really, really slowly, and I don't think it could have come out any faster.
Is that unusual for you?
No. No. Golden Mean probably took 7 years, so I'm getting slower, I guess, in my old age. But no, I work quite slowly.
And so there are. They're different. I mean, the relationships between the sisters are very, very different. So did you have to work on? I mean, you had one set sort of, you knew who they were, but the other ones, did it take you a while to sort of figure out what their relationship to each other was? Because it's kind of, a lot of it's left unsaid, which is one of my favorite parts about the book, is that it requires a certain amount of sophistication and work on the part of the reader. So I mean, did you have to work to get those other two sisters? I mean, was it a bit of trial and error all the way through?
Yeah, for sure. You've really nailed it. The first set of sisters, I mean, there are parallels between the two sets, right? So in each case, we've got the sister who is the responsible one, the caregiver, the one who sort of keeps everything going. And then we've got the other sister who in each case is in need of care, let's put it that way. But the way that those relationships played out were quite different, and purposely quite different. In the one case, we had the sister who's got the developmental delay. And that in a way was easier for me because I do have someone in my life like that. And I felt like I was writing from a very genuine place there. And then the other sister has a mental illness, which is, I had to research and had to be really conscious that I was being true and being as accurate as I could with that. And it resulted in, as I say, these sort of parallel and yet not nearly identical narratives, because the sisters' responses to what happens, and there's a tragedy in each family, and the responses to what happens to the sisters in each case is quite different. The way in which the sisters, the responsible sisters, kind of absorb or don't, the trauma and the ramifications of what happens. It was a lot of work. That was hard. Yeah.
And so did you write big and then have to cut it back, or was it the other way around, like where you had this sort of kernel and then had to kind of keep on growing it by accretion?
it's always the other way around for me. I always start way too short and have to get it longer, as I mentioned in my conversation with my editor. My approach is to work from a very narrative outline so that you can always see, I think of it as an embryo almost. You can always see the kind of basic form that the thing is going to take, but it'll be sort of bullet point, a list of scenes, and then I'll write a scene and it'll get that little bit bigger and then a little bit bigger and then a little bit bigger. So I always work that way. I should mention as well, I mean, I think the other place you asked initially where the story came from, and I mentioned that short story that I'd been working on. But the other place that it came from was, as I was working on that story, I was rereading Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky. And I was really struck by the sisters at the beginning of that novel. So for everybody who read Dostoevsky a long time ago, of course, we've got Raskolnikov, who is our young student, who is the protagonist. And he decides, almost as a kind of exercise in morality or moral questioning, he decides he's going to murder an elderly moneylender, a woman who is preys on the people around her and is very crabby and grumpy and mean. And he figures, I'm going to murder her, I'm going to steal her money, and it'll be to everyone's benefit. This woman is a terrible person and is not serving anyone. But of course, as soon as he goes to do the act, it gets messy because it turns out that she lives with a sister who is, I think Dostoevsky says, simple-minded, right? So he has to murder both of them because she's a witness, and then everything kind of unspools from there. And of course, you know, I look at that and I think, yeah, but I mean, what would the sister's version of this story be if she could tell it? You know, how terrible of a person is she if she, you know, is caring for the sister and has been all her life? You know, she's mean and suspicious and, you know, but doesn't she have a right to be? She got murdered, you know, after all, by the people that she's serving. So I thought, how do you tell that story? Well, you can't kill them off right away, right? You have to keep the sisters alive for a little bit longer. And so instead of murder, I went to stalking, and I had the Raskolnikov character sort of come back into their lives again and again and again, in the way in which in Crime and Punishment, he goes back to the apartment, the scene of the crime again and again and again, except they're not dead yet.
So there's a lot of sensitivity around developmentally challenged people, right? Did you have to be really careful when you were writing that?
Of course. And it's not the first time that this is something that I've tried to write about. Certainly there was the character of Arhideus in The Golden Mean. There was, you know, the character in Sweet Girl as well. Like there's this is a character who always comes up for me because, as I say, I have someone in my life like this. And, you know, I try to be very honest. I try to capture, because, you know, often I think in books and in popular culture, certainly, we take either the view that these are people who are innately sort of terrible and evil and ugly and are going to do terrible things, or these are people who are saintly and wonderful and bring joy to everyone's life. And of course, that's not fair in any direction. They're complicated, like everybody's complicated. All people are complicated and have complicated emotions and complicated lives. And to be able to capture that, I think, is really important. And it's somewhere that as a culture, I think we're still lagging behind. So to capture Sarah's frustration with Maddie, Maddie's frustration with Sarah, Maddie's loves and Maddie's desires, and, you know, the burden that Sarah perceives that puts on her. It's terribly complicated. And, you know, in that caregiving context, I think that, hence the title, right? Consent, this idea that, you know, who gets to consent to what? And when you're in that caregiving kind of a situation, you're not always consenting to that. And maybe that's not always the best thing for the people involved. And yet in families where you love each other, this happens. So I lost the thread of your question, Ben.
No,
it's
it
so
was
complicated.
Fine,
it's so complicated.
But I mean, it's the same with the other pair of sisters. I mean, their relationship and the implied and taken consent. I mean, it's a pretty slippery relationship there, right? And I thought that you did a really great job of revealing that slowly, so that you got the reader gets a bit of a sense of the difficulties involved in the relationship, without you ever having to really beat them over the head with it. But that kind of difficulty in a relationship, and in a relationship which is unbalanced to a certain extent, and I thought that was pretty well handled, but very must have been
Thank
very
you.
tricky um, to kind of make it work.
So the other relationship with Jenny and Saskia, they're twins. They're identical twins. And I confess I started that out a little bit tongue in cheek because I thought, after I had created this fairly literary, kind of dark, inspired by Dostoevsky relationship between the first set of sisters, and I decided that rather than make that bigger, I wanted a foil to it. I thought, what do I want this storyline to be? I want to write a thriller. I've never written a thriller. I'm going to try this. What are the tropes? What are the conventions of a thriller? Twins, people in comas, mysteries, all weird, dark sexual stuff. And so I threw all of that stuff in there, and I was kind of having fun to start with. But of course, it kept getting kind of deeper and darker, and had to match the tone at first. But like I say, it started in a little bit of a lighter place and a little more of a tongue-in-cheek place. There's a twin in a coma.
Okay, so
am I
now
blowing the plot? Is that a spoiler?
No. In fact, I think that one of the things that we should be conscious of is that you as an author and me as a bookseller, what we really want is for people to go out and buy the book and read it. So I have no intention whatsoever of giving away any more of the plot than is absolutely necessary. So I have some other questions about details, but before we get to that, maybe you'd like to read a little bit.
For sure. So I'm going to read from just a little section that's relatively late in the book. And, as I mentioned, the two storylines run along separate tracks for quite a long period in the novel. And it ends up being one sort of male character who brings these two storylines together. So this is a sort of key moment in the relationship between the one of each of the sets of sisters. June 2018. The phone rang again. It had been ringing for days. Saskia answered, finally. Yes? Saskia? Saskia Gilbert? Saskia waited. It's Sarah Landau. They arranged to meet the next afternoon in a hotel bar downtown. Sarah was there when Saskia arrived, drinking red wine. Saskia ordered tea. Sarah had a tremor. Saskia had a headache. After saying hello, they didn't speak until the waitress had left. They went for supper at a Cambodian place Saskia knew. Spicy soup, plastic booths, the kind of place where you didn't bother to take your jacket off. Student food, hangover food. You look rough, Sarah said softly. I don't sleep well. Neither do I, Sarah said. They went back to Sarah's apartment, up in the sky there in Yaletown near the library. She had some lovely things. The celadon dish on the console in the front hall where she left her keys and coins, the mid-century teak sofa, the astonishing array of perfumes that she kept like condiments in the door of the fridge, the vials of Zoloft and clonazepam and Seconal on the bedside table, next to the phone dock and the hand cream and the wrist brace and the night guard and the brandy. They went back to Saskia's parents' house. They looked at photos, and Saskia showed Sarah Jenny's clothes, which filled her closet. She'd gotten rid of pretty much everything else. They arranged to meet at a hotel bar downtown, a different one. Sarah knew a lot of these places, expensive and anonymous, where if you were wearing nice clothes, you could drink a little too much and no one would remember you. They went for Lebanese at Cambie and Hastings, across the street from the cenotaph where the drug dealers watched and waited. They argued that time. The phone rang again. I'm sorry, Saskia said, and Sarah said, I'm sorry. They went back to Sarah's apartment. They agreed about some things, disagreed about others. At times, each blamed the other's intransigence on the other's age. So old, so young, so green, so gray, so hard, so soft. Actually, they were both hard, angry, and unforgiving. Actually, they were both soft, tender with pain, and childlike with incomprehension. Do you ever wonder about consent? Sarah would ask, and Saskia would repeat the things she'd read about safe words and the psychology of the submissive. But in the car, that text, Sarah would say, and Saskia would shrug. What must Jenny have been thinking in that moment? Do you think Maddie was happy with him? Saskia asked. Sarah looked at the bar, nodded at the bar. They met for the last time at a pub on Granville Street during happy hour. The place was packed and they had trouble hearing each other. Not that there was much left to talk about by that point. Saskia left first. Sarah watched her go. She was brittle. A man bumped her, and she turned and swore in his face, startling him out of the apologetic grin he had put on. So brittle. Bit by bit, she would chip off shards sharp enough to cut until there was just a blade of her left in the body's sheath. Sarah left first. Saskia watched her go. She was frail. Her mind would give out, and her liver. That was guilt. It was the difference between them. Guilt would be the death of Sarah, but not of Saskia. There she goes, Saskia thought, in her lovely coat, that cashmere and gilt blend so few can afford. That lovely perfume she trails, lilies and gilt. At the door, Sarah turned and looked back at Saskia, as though she had just remembered something she meant to say, and touched her heart. Saskia almost smiled. They never spoke again. Thank you.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Do you find it difficult to read like that?
No.
Like if you were
No.
doing an event, would you be nervous about getting up to read?
No.
Is that because of your job, you think, or not?
I think partly maybe. I spent a lot of years studying piano. I had this demented idea that I was going to be a concert pianist, which is ridiculous because I wasn't near good enough. But and I had awful stage fright when I was performing. And I think with reading, I just feel as though, I mean, what's to be frightened of? The book's out in the world. People can read it. You know, it's just me sort of presenting what I hear in my ear, right? Writing is a lot about the sound of things and the way I hear it, because I sit and listen and then write. You know, it's very oral for me.
So do you read out loud when you're writing? I mean,
yeah. Yeah. And I always tell my students to do that for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And you mentioned your relationship with Anne Collins. Do you have other readers?
No. First readers, no, it's pretty much just Anne. I'm a bit of a weirdo that way. I'm really introverted, and I like to sort of hold things pretty close until I've gotten them as far as I can. And then, Anne is my very trusted first reader for everything.
Okay.
I'll show stuff to my husband eventually, and he's just like, yeah, that's nice. Great. Thanks, honey.
That's right. Leave me alone. Let me watch the hockey game.
Yeah, basically.
Okay, that's really interesting. So now, what about the mothers in this book?
Yeah, I mean, when I gave this book to my mom, I had to, as I do in every book I write, swear up and down that there's no mother in this book that is my mother, and I still think she thinks it's always her. She's like, because I really like it. I was like, Mom, it's not you. I have a lot of compassion for the mothers in this book, honestly. They are they're damaged people, they're struggling people, they're flawed people. They're creatures of their time, I think, each of them. So the twins' mother is an alcoholic, and the mother of the other pair, Sarah and Maddie, is a virulent racist and a fairly horrible person all around. Although, you know, the one bit of goodness in her, she spends on Maddie. She's a wonderful mother to this daughter who needs it. You know, the little bit of care that she has, she puts it where it needs to go. So they're complex. I hope.
Well, no, I agree, but I think one of the other things that that stands out about this book. And another thing which happens to be dear to my heart as a reader is there's a lot of moral ambivalence in the book, and I think that Sarah and Maddie's mother is a perfect example of that, and the men as well. You kind of make them, they're not really easy to pin down all the time either, despite their obvious frailties. There's a certain amount of sympathy that you manage to generate for them. Is that like, how do you do that?
It's the most important thing. I don't think there's anything more important than that when you're writing. Pure evil, pure good characters, they're boring characters. They're so boring. And in the same way in which we have to complexify characters like the developmentally disabled character, I think you have to complexify characters who do bad things. And the male character that I alluded to, the Raskolnikov character, he's called Robert in the book, who ends up bringing the two pairs of sisters together. He does some terrible things. He does some very generous things. I remember my husband saying to me after he read the book for the first time, I felt really sorry for him. And I thought, oh, that's so interesting, because there were times in writing the book when I was so angry with him, and I thought, oh, you're going to get what you deserve. And then there were other times, of course, when I thought, or not of course, but there were times when he kind of surprised me with the kindness and the sensitivity that he was able to show. And that moment where, as I say, we realized that the two storylines are going to come together, that was really a Robert moment where he was kind of surprising me with what his connections to the two sets of sisters were. So yeah, he was, in many ways, he was really aggravating, because you can't completely hate him and you can't completely like him. You have to, you have to try see all around him.
So, I mean, he had some influence on that. I mean, this isn't just something where you say, okay, I'm going to make this guy a little bit more humane. I'm going to soften this up a little bit. I mean, these people just kind of, they did that themselves, these characters. Because I'm always really interested in that. You hear novelists say, well, these characters just kind of ran away with me, and you think, well, is that allowed? So so I'm interested to hear that.
I take a very sort of steady and rational approach to every aspect of writing, character creation. I like to be fairly controlled. I like to know what I'm doing. So I don't really subscribe to, oh, the character came to me, or it's like they're a real person. They're not real people. They're words on a page for me. And they create something in the imagination, but they remain words on a page. Having said that, there were definitely moments in writing this where I would sort of write him doing something, and then I'd have to sit back for a long time and kind of look at it this way and that and say, really? Can I pull that off? Is that, I'm surprising myself in the writing, which is always a good sign, because, if I'm too controlled, and I know this, it's sort of a flaw in the work. If I'm too controlled, the effect comes out kind of cold and sterile. And if I'm surprising myself every now and again, that helps. But he surprised me in ways where I thought, would he do that? And then I thought, and then of course I had to interrogate myself and sort of think, why would you think that he wouldn't do that? It was so complicated. It was so complicated. And consent, that title, again, it comes up in so many contexts to do with him as well. Like, what's he consenting to? I mean, we talk a lot about consent in terms of sexual consent and the women, but, I think it's definitely that in this book, but it's more too. It's consent as it pertains to caregiving. It's consent as it pertains to, an agreement that you might make with another person. What are you consenting to when you agree to do something with someone? Where are the mysteries wrapped up in that? So I'm trying not to blow the ending. I'm trying not to give too much away, but again, I've wandered away from your question, I think.
No, not at all. I don't really, I was kind of hoping that we would be able to have a conversation. And I think from my point of view, this has been quite satisfactory in that regard.
Oh, good.
Like I don't have but I don't have a list of questions or anything. I'm interested though in materialism in this book. It plays a really large part, and I'm wondering what that means to you. What the sort of origins of that that sensitivity are.
So I think perhaps in particular, you're referring to the character of Sarah, who is the sister who cares for Maddie.
Right, and
She
but her opposite foil in Saskia to a certain
and
extent.
Saskia as well. Yeah, for sure, for sure. Yeah, there's a lot in this book about fashion, about clothes, about perfume, about sort of lovely objects that they surround themselves with. And Sarah, in particular, I think, has, uses this interest in a very intellectual way to distance herself from her sister. She would say, as I would say, I'm making fun of myself a little bit because I love this stuff too, but it's like, I love Alexander McQueen. I don't wear Alexander. I would never, like, I dress like a normal person. I wear jeans and t-shirts, and but in a sort of sculptural sense, almost, these are beautiful works of art. These clothes that many sort of, or not many, actually, few really elite dressmakers or designers can come up with. Um, and I think she uses it in that way. I mean, definitely there's a sensual aspect as well. Addiction is a thread that runs through the book, and she has a shopping addiction. She has an alcohol addiction. She has an addiction to things that she finds beautiful and sensual and soothing, I think because she's a very unhappy person. And so that sort of materialism plays into that. And then, of course, with Jenny, uh, this is someone who is impulsive, unpredictable, unreliable, spends money as soon as she gets it. She's beautiful. She's engaging. They're identical twins, but she's the beautiful one, which can be the case, right? And so she has. It's almost an opposite. It's she just lives in the moment. She lives for the day, and eventually, again, I don't want to give too much away, but like all of that's going to get stripped away from her. And then she's going to have to cope with that. Jenny's going to have to cope. Saskia, I should say, was going to have to cope with that. And Saskia is going to take on some of those trappings herself for a while, but in the long run, she can't sustain it. She has a very different relationship to those material things that Sarah so covets.
Right, but clothing and appearance are fairly important to both of those, to both sides of that, right? I mean, Saskia at one point wears some of Jenny's clothes, and
Yeah.
and actually, I think feels like a different person when she does that.
Because she elicits a different reaction from other people. And I think that's an interesting thing about clothes as well. Clothes are a language, they're a code. And um, I always find it fascinating. For instance, during the presidential elections, periodically you read the New York Times and they'll have an article about, well, she was wearing purple and this is the reason why that color was chosen, or she was wearing white and that's symbolic of this, or she was wearing, we project things with the clothes that we choose. You have the clothes that make you feel powerful, or you have the clothes that make you feel, date night, romantic, airy, you have the clothes that make you feel capable and in charge. And I think the idea that Saskia could take on her sister's persona to such an extent just by taking on the clothes, and sort of think, we're twins and yet we're so different. What does it feel like to walk in her shoes, to live in her skin? She tries to figure that out. And I think arguably by the end she does figure it out, but it's not through those surfaces. It's not through the armor that she puts on, if you will.
Right, but Sarah, it seems to me that there's this, to a certain extent, Sarah starts to take on her clothing addiction in part as a rebellion against her mother. Is that
She
too much of a
does.
stretch?
Oh no, that's absolutely correct. I want to note, I think that part of where that comes from for me is, there's a lot of care that she and her mother have always taken in Maddie's presentation and how Maddie is clothed. She has to look nice. She has to look clean. She has to look appropriate. And that's a kind of armor. That's a kind of protection for somebody like Maddie, who doesn't have a lot of natural protection around her. But then I think almost as a reaction to that, Sarah kind of goes off down a road into like the history of fashion and vintage clothing and super expensive, these works of art. And she blows a ton of money on this stuff because she doesn't want to be, the doctor or the lawyer or the responsible, whatever it is that her mother wants her to be. She wants to be this other thing. I think I say early in the book, for her, it's about sex, it's about eros, it's about attractiveness, and she knows that she's none of those things in a way. So she's reaching for something she isn't through this medium, and that something she isn't is tied up with those things, but also tied up with a rejection of who her family is, who her mother is, who her sister is. She wants to put that space there and say, I have this very intellectual, very, very highbrow appreciation for these things, and I can be alone in that. I can be alone in my head in that.
Right, but so then to a certain extent, both of the major, most of the two serious women from the sets of sisters, they're both fighting against what they're not. Is that right? You think that's right?
I think so. Was that a Jane Bowles reference? Did you just sneak that in there? Two serious ladies. I very much appreciate that. I love Jane Bowles. Yeah, I think so. I think so. They are. I mean, it's a push me, pull you, and this is where addiction, I think, becomes interesting too, because it's a sort of simultaneous wanting to embrace the thing that they're not, and also wanting to push away the thing that they're not. The way in which, Saskia kind of yo-yos back and forth between trying to dress as her sister, trying to look in the mirror and see her sister once she can't see her anymore, and then pushing that away and sort of saying, nope, that's not who I am. I can't be that. Her relationship with her parents, which is very different than her twins' relationship with their parents, and the times when she savors that, when she likes being the responsible one that her father respects, and then the times when she absolutely wants to thwart every expectation that her parents have of her. And Sarah, likewise, I think that she covets a certain life that has no place for Maddie in it, and yet her life will always have a place for Maddie in it. It has to, because she loves her. So yeah, there's this constant kind of in and out, back and forth, and that use of addiction. There's addictions all over the place in this book. I think that you do get that kind of yo-yoing between, the person you are when you're sober, the person you are when you're not, and that sort of that plunge in and out of different aspects of yourself.
Okay, we still have a little bit of time. I'm interested. I'd love to keep on talking about the book, but okay. One last question about the book. What about the ending? Was it? I mean, did you know how you're going to end it? I mean, I don't want to talk about what the ending actually is.
No,
but I think that the ending is really well done, and it's always really difficult to get an ending to a book that's going to be an ending. And so was that hard, or did you already know how that was going to end up?
From the point at which I read just now, which is maybe the 3/4 point in the book, once I nailed that, from there to the end, I knew what was going to happen. And then, the execution of it was, of course, was tricky, because there's a lot that, let me back up and answer that question in a different way, because there was an image that kept coming back to me as I was working, which I think kind of maybe explains what I was trying to do. That image is of shot silk. It's that kind of silk where it's the warp threads are one color and the weft threads are the other color. So you look at it one way and it's blue, and then you look at it the other way and it's green. And it's this idea that you can read a scene and then read the next scene and say, wait a minute, I thought that was blue. That was green. And it's this sort of shimmering back and forth between what you think you read and what actually happened. And, that was the effect that I wanted to play with in that last quarter of the novel. So once I had that scene down, that one that I just read to you, where you think you know what happened in that scene, from there on out, I was able to sort of plot what was going to happen. And then it was just the execution. It was just finding the sentences.
Great. So now, completely separately, you're longlisted for the Giller Prize. The Giller Prize is putting this on, and for me as a bookseller, the Giller Prize has always been one of the most extraordinary happenings in my entire career. I just think it was really an amazing thing, and for me it was always an extraordinary thrill to be invited And then, you know, we've actually had a relationship with the prize. We've sold books at their events in Toronto for a long time. You know, what do you feel about the Giller Prize? I mean, do you have, is it?
Gratitude, so much gratitude. Honestly, I think I met you after, you know, getting nominated.
That's
Um,
right.
it was definitely, it was very life-changing. You know, I've had the great honor also to serve on a jury, one of the juries the year that S.E. Dugin was the winner. Um, I think it shines such a spotlight on such a worthy thing, which is, you know, Canadian letters, Canadian books. It's incredible what that prize has managed to do and the profile that it's managed to bring. Um, I mean, of course, I always want to say, as with any prize, you know, read the winner and then read the short list and then read the long list and then read the books that didn't make the long list, because a spotlight necessarily has a narrow kind of radius, and you want to always sort of see what else is out there. But I have nothing but gratitude, and I think that it has been nothing but good for fiction
All right,
in this
and I'm
country.
supposed to, at this particular moment, remind our audience that if they have any questions, they should access the Q&A thing down at the bottom there somewhere. And I only have a couple more things that I want to ask you. One of them is, you must have finished this book sort of before the serious depredations of COVID happened, right?
Yeah, I
Are you
did.
writing
Yeah.
now, or are you having difficulty writing now?
Oh, I'm writing now. That's not where I thought you were going with that. I actually had to change the timeline in the book so that it didn't encroach into COVID time, because it would be really weird that everybody wasn't wearing masks. So the very last piece of this book was having to actually back all the dates up so it didn't
Oh,
run
that's
past
really
March
interesting.
2020.
Yeah.
Yeah, Anne made me do that. Anne's fault. Um, no, I'm slowly working on something right now. Yeah.
And so you know, I was interviewed by a budding journalism student, and the she said, you know, what is it with events? Like, why are events so popular? And I said, well, for one thing, you know, it's really an amazing thing when readers get to meet writers. But I also said that it's a pretty amazing thing when writers actually get to meet readers in a controlled environment. Is that an accurate assessment?
It really is. I mean, it's an honor, of course, because, you know, the thought of anyone reading something that I've written is, you know, it's amazing to think that someone would give their time to that. So I am endlessly grateful to readers. I've also been challenged by readers in a lot of, to me, really helpful ways in which they'll sort of, you know, tell me what they were reading when they read my book, or ways in which, you know, they felt that the book, you know, might have fallen short, or they might have had a different view of things than had I considered. And, you know, I think about those interactions for a long time. Those feed me in a way as well. I don't think that you can be a writer on your own in a vacuum. Like, it's a conversation. It has to be a conversation. It's a conversation with society. It's a conversation with the period that you're in, the period of time that you're writing. It's a conversation with your readers too. And so it shouldn't be one way. It should be back and forth. And with that, bring on the questions, right? Because we're going to the questions now, I think.
Yeah. Well, do you miss that, like being on the road for your book, or not?
Um,
Tell
I'm
me
an
the truth.
introvert, so I'll tell you the truth. I'm happy doing it this way, honestly. I am quite introverted. I am quite shy. I love being around my kids and my husband and my dog. And, you know, I'm a bit of a homebody. So, of course, I miss seeing people. There are people in Toronto that I would love to see. There are people in many parts of the country I'd love to see. But I feel as though I'm incredibly fortunate that I can do this sort of thing in this way. You know, um, yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, so I think, oh, well, is it too early? Can I just jump ahead by 1 minute and open this up to the audience? I have down here a little thing that says Q&A. Let's go. So the first one is, What about the cover of the book, Annabelle? Did you
Mm.
have any influence into that? And what do you think about it?
I had a teeny bit of influence into it, and I can tell you what that is. I love the cover. I thought it was stunning. It's not something I would ever have thought of. So of course it's this inverted wine glass, and the initial version of it, it was over top of a fly, and I said, "No, could you please make it a spider?" So they made it into a spider, and that was my influence. I love the idea of, a winged insect that can't fly, but I thought, no, that's not who Robert is in this book. Robert's a spider. He's got a web, and you touch one piece here and it trembles over there, and they're all connected by this web. So for me, it had to be a spider. But I feel so
I should actually
fortunate with it.
put it up
Oh
there
yeah,
so
there
people
you've
can
got
see
it.
it. There it is.
Yeah.
But the other thing is that's how you take a pest out without whacking it with a newspaper. So
Yep.
I was kind of interested in that aspect of it as well.
And that's what I do, because I don't, and you slide the piece of paper under, and then you kind of walk over to the front door, and
Yeah.
I do that. And yet that had never occurred to me. Never occurred to me that there was a kindness happening with that cover. You're such a nice man, Ben. You really are.
Okay, so here is a question. When you say the story of the second set of sisters came to you, can you describe that a bit more? How did they come to you? Were you on a walk? Did you wake from a dream? Or did they appear to you as you wrote?
No, I constructed them fairly consciously, I think. As I say, I went into it thinking, I want to write a thriller. What are the conventions of a thriller? I'm going to have twins. I'm going to have identical twins. They're going to dress up as each other and fool people. And one of them's going to be in a coma because, I thought I was being all clever and funny. And then, of course, as I worked on it, and I had to think through, how are these two going to balance those other two? How are they going to be a foil? So I had to have parallels in a certain sense of the caregiver and the one in need of care. But I wanted the afflictions to be quite different. So yeah, they are quite different. And then you just build, right? You plan and you build. Like I say, I am an outliner. I like to sort of think ahead before I commit to what I'm going to put on the page. And I had to sort of plan, okay, who are these people? Who are they? How are they going to change through the course of their own stories? And you can plan that ahead. I mean, for all the apprentice writers out there, I mean, it actually is to your benefit to plan that ahead, because then you'll always know that your story is moving in the right direction.
All right, and this is an interesting one. I was thrown a bit by Professor Tayak and wondered if the professor was the last person that Saskia had to stand up to, and that was why she sought him out. Did I miss something about their relationship?
No, so Professor Tayak is Saskia for a while is studying French literature, and she has he's her thesis supervisor, and she has a bit of a fraught relationship with him. He pretends to be this sort of bad boy French intellectual, and he's actually none of that. But he loans her a book, and it is years and years before she's able to return this book to him. It's one of the last things that she does in the novel, is she seeks him out and returns this book. And I don't think it's so much wanting to stand up to him as not wanting to be indebted to him. She doesn't want to be indebted to anybody. She doesn't want to owe anybody anything. And even as far as one little book of, it's a very sweet, harmless little book, and that he gave her trying to comfort her. And she's like, nope, not taking this from you. I'm giving it back.
And here's one from the United States where the book had a different cover, a perfume bottle.
Yes.
And books sometimes have different titles. I liked Mr. McNally's observation that it's nice for readers and writers to meet. Thank you very much. Meetings, and whether they're controlled or chaotic, seem like an important theme in the book. In fact, I think it could have been called Control or called Chaos. Ms. Lyon, did you have any other titles in mind?
Okay, where were you, reader, when I was trying to come up with the title for this book? Because you could have helped me so much. its working title for the longest time was De Winter, and that's the name of a designer of a dress, a particular dress that Sarah covets early on. And when it was just the story of the two sisters, that worked fine as a kind of working title for the book. But then when the other pair came in, I kind of talked it over with the editor, and we agreed that it threw too much emphasis onto the one side of the story because the De Winter really doesn't figure into the twins story. So then after that, it became, okay, so what unites these stories? And consent was an interesting one. I mean, I landed on that and I thought, yeah, that's what this book is about for me. I like control too, I have to say. And at first the publisher was a little bit like, really? Is this a Me Too book? And I was like, oh, I only get to use this if it's a Me Too book. And then I thought, but what about this makes it not a Me Too book? Is it that one of the characters is developmentally disabled, like what? And so that in itself became a really interesting kind of conversation and way of thinking about consent. Again, like, where do we draw those boundaries? Who's allowed to connect themselves to that word? Who's not? When do we have a consent conversation? When do we not? When can we even use the word? So I liked it even more as a result of the sort of hesitancy and the trepidation of everybody who sort of heard it and had to think about whether it fit. And that made me think, yeah, that's the word. So that's how we landed on consent.
So this actually was a question that occurred to me during our conversation when you said that you've been reading Crime and Punishment, and I thought I was going to ask you, if you read fiction while you were writing fiction, but then it occurred to me that if it took you 7 years to write a book, you probably would have to read at least some fiction to keep yourself from going totally insane. But this is a question, and it's, can you name some of the books that you have enjoyed reading in the past year?
Oh, sure. I mean, I have to start with a disclaimer, which is that because I work in a creative writing program, I read tons and tons and tons of unpublished work, student work, which is super exciting. And I know that those are going to be those are going to be books a few years down the road. So a lot of my reading is that. Some real standouts. Francesca Equiazzi's Butter Honey Pig Bread was a big favorite of mine this past year. Nancy Lee's poetry collection, What Hurts Going Down, I think is extraordinary. It's that deer in headlights question, Ben. It's like, yeah, I read a book once. I know I did. I'm trying to picture what else I've got. Karen Russell's Orange World from a couple of years ago. Leanne Beresamasaki Simpson's This Accident of Being Lost, which I use in the classroom a ton. I don't ever always read things that are completely current, so there's some catching up to do. Some Ted Chiang stories. What else have I read? I'm kind of blanking at the moment, but I mean, those are some that were really knockout for me.
That's good. You referred to the readings that you do as part of your job, and I've always been interested in how your job, what impact your job has on your view of the editorial process, for one thing, and on your ability to sort of maintain focus on what you're working on when you're spending so much time fine-tuning other people's work.
For me, they're very complementary. And I think, part of my job is, again, it's that sort of analytical part of my brain where I'm trying to break down for other people. Okay, these are the elements of the craft that you're learning. I do think of writing as a lot more like, carpentry than something where you have to drink a lot of wine and sort of wait to get struck by the muse. No, it's something that you can work at and learn skills and improve. And so in being forced to articulate in some detail to other people, like, this is how you get this effect. This is how you do that. This is what happens when you do this. I can turn that back on myself. And I think that that's one of the great things that you learn in a creative writing program. In engaging with other people's work, you learn skills that you turn back on your own work. And so it's enabled me, I think, to get into the writing process faster. I don't spend a lot of time sitting at the desk, procrastinating or staring at the wall. I tend to always know what I want to do. And when I sit down, I'm ready to go. There's a certain discipline that I think having limited time brings, I also think having a background in music brings, when you sit down and you practice, you don't sit there thinking about practice and not doing it. Well, I'm getting off topic, but yeah, for me, teaching is a gift. I feel that I learn so much from the students. They feed me as much more than I think I'm able to feed them.
And why don't we both give a huge shout out to Anne Collins, who is probably as good an editor as we've ever had in the country. But do you have
She's the
arguments with it?
best.
Do you have arguments with Anne? Do you have to
Oh, no,
defend your corner sometimes?
No, it's funny. And I teach this to my students as well, and it's very counterintuitive. But if Anne suggests, okay, so I got to back up a little bit. When I give a draft to Anne, I'm a genius. It's perfect. It's done. So that when she comes back to me and says, have you thought about doing this and this and this? Of course, my knee-jerk reaction is, oh my goodness, why did you not understand the extent of my genius? And then I have to go to bed and sleep and get up the next day and look at it and say, yeah, Anne's absolutely right, because Anne's always absolutely right. And she's very good. You have to learn to put your ego aside when you're going through that editorial process. She's very good at pointing to where things are unfinished or where things, aren't quite gelling. My default position with her is if she suggests something, even if I think, I don't know if that's going to work, I'll try it. And I teach that to students as well. And I would say that to any aspiring writer. The benefit is, it's way easier to talk yourself out of a revision, to talk yourself out of trying something than to actually do it. And yet you don't realize whether it's going to work or not most of the time until you actually try. And then if it doesn't work, you've got a leg to stand on to go back to your editor and show them the pages and say, I tried this thing that you asked me to do. Look, here it is. And they'll go, oh yeah, I see what you're saying. And then you go on and, often what's happened is in that case, the editor has pointed to something that is not working. And perhaps the solution they offered isn't the right solution, but the place is still a problem. And you've identified that together. So, no, we don't argue much. I have so much respect for her, and I would never dismiss anything she says out of hand. My inclination is always to try what she suggests first.
And do you have problems with your students ever? I mean, did they sort of say, look, what's going on? Like, you don't understand what I'm talking about or what?
Oh yeah, all the time. And I tell them exactly that story, which is that's always my knee-jerk reaction as well. What do you mean? What do you mean I have to do more work on it? And in the end, of course, their writing is their writing. And, all I can do is offer. My job is not to churn out little Annabelles. My job is to help them kind of realize their own voice and to, tell their own stories. And, to the extent that my help helps them, they're welcome to take it. And to the extent that it doesn't, they don't have to.
Okay, one last question. Why is David Park's full name used the majority of the time throughout the book and not just David?
So David Park is a friend of Sarah's, going back to when they were high school sweethearts. He is of Korean Canadian heritage. She does it with her friend Donna August as well. I'll point that out also. I think she does that with Marcel a lot as well. No, sorry. Marcel is the other storyline. I cross them. I think it's an echo of her mother in her ear, because her mother, I mentioned, is the one who is quite virulently racist and really objected to her seeing David Park. And so, of course, she pushed back on that. But I think she's always hearing, her mother's sort of emphasis on, David Park, this person, this David Park. And so I think she's always kind of hearing that in her ear.
All right.
I like David Park. Another flawed man, but I like him. He's a nice man too.
Well, Annabel, can I just say thank you on behalf of all the readers and booksellers in the country. And congratulations on this phenomenal book. Congratulations on being longlisted for the Women's Fiction Prize. That is major. And thank you for spending this hour with me. I miss seeing you person to person, and one of these days it'll happen again. But I appreciate all the effort that you've put into tonight's event. Audience, thank you all very much. And I am going to sign off. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you to you as well, Ben. I miss coming to see you in your lovely shop. And thank you to everyone who came to listen. I'm so honored. Everyone's dead. Thank you.
And thank you, Annabel, and thank you, Ben, for this wonderful hour. Thank you all for joining us. I hope you enjoyed hearing from both the interviewer and our author. This interview will be available on our YouTube station during the next couple of days. So if you know anybody who by chance missed this interview, they will be able to watch it there. And please join us on April 5th when our book author will be Thomas King, author of Indians on Vacation. And he will be interviewed by CBC host, writer, and poet Rosanna Deerchild. If you subscribed to our book club mailing list, you will automatically be sent a registration notice. And if you haven't, please do so. Thanks so much and good night.